You think no one notices? Jasmine Carter whispered to herself as she adjusted the tray in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly under the weight of the ceramic dishes stacked with care, the scent of roasted garlic and fresh bread wafting from the kitchen blending with the warm hum of the espresso machine. A low chatter of diners filling the air, the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows catching the edge of her uniform, highlighting the faint creases of long hours spent in service, her gaze flicking nervously toward the line of tables where polite smiles masked subtle impatience, the clink of silverware punctuating each quiet sigh, her heart beating faster with each step toward the next table, a soft footstep behind her making her glance over her shoulder briefly before refocusing, remembering the promises she made to herself every morning as she tied her apron, the small notes she left her younger brother in the morning for courage and reassurance, the tiny messages that carried more hope than the city outside the glass doors, the smell of polished wood and lemon cleaning solution grounding her, reminding her of the routine, the discipline, the endless cycle of plates and orders and polite hellos. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady the rhythm of her breathing, each inhale pulling in the scent of freshly baked bread, each exhale releasing tension she didn't even realize she'd been holding. A glance at the corner table revealed a man adjusting his tie, the sun glinting off his watch, the way he tapped his finger against the rim of his glass creating a subtle metronome that synchronized with the quiet thump in her chest, the soft rustle of napkins as servers passed by echoing like distant waves. She remembered the training from yesterday, the emphasis on presence and calm, how small gestures can convey professionalism even when the world seems to rush past you. Jasmine adjusted her shoulders, squared them, letting the weight of the day and the expectations roll off her back just enough to move with purpose. The faint sound of laughter from a nearby table tinged with the occasional hint of impatience. The way the sunlight reflected off the polished wood of the table, making tiny patterns on her shoes. She bent slightly to serve a plate, the warmth radiating from the dish reminding her of the effort and care she put into each meal, the quiet hum of conversation continuing around her, a subtle shift in air as someone entered the restaurant. The bell over the door chiming softly, but carrying more than sound. A presence that made her pause mid-step, the camera following her gaze as it swept across the room. The feeling of being observed layering over her usual caution, the gentle pressure of her hand against the tray, the tension in her shoulders, the slight flutter in her stomach as if the air itself had thickened, the clink of a glass catching her attention, her eyes meeting the figure in the doorway, the casual stance and confident air of a man who belonged to the space in a different way. Her breath caught for a moment, the soft shuffle of other servers moving past, the hum of the ventilation overhead blending with the muted conversations. She took another careful step, feeling the weight of invisible eyes upon her, the rhythm of her heartbeat aligning with the soft tap of a fork against a plate somewhere in the distance. The warmth of sunlight mingling with the faint cool breeze from the open window. She reminded herself of the strength it took to remain composed, to hold the tray steady, to continue her walk through the dining room with quiet determination. The way her uniform rested against her frame, slightly damp from the morning's cleaning, the faint scent of lemon polish still clinging to the fabric, the gentle sway of the chandelier above casting tiny reflections across the floor, the careful placement of her steps, the subtle rise and fall of the floor beneath her, each motion measured yet fluid, as if she were moving through a carefully choreographed scene, a breath in, a breath out, each step deliberate, each glance thoughtful, a silent reminder that even in the presence of unspoken scrutiny, she could remain grounded. And then, just as she rounded the corner toward the next table, a soft gasp, barely audible but cutting through the gentle hum, her fingers tightening slightly around the tray, her gaze lifting toward the source, a single tear glimmering in the corner of her eye as she realized someone had noticed her moment of vulnerability. The room seemed to hold its breath, and Jasmine, in that quiet suspended instant, felt both exposed and profoundly human, knowing that this small, unspoken acknowledgment carried the weight of something far larger than herself. The sunlight catching the faint sheen of perspiration on her brow, the warmth of the room, the scent of bread, the quiet expectation in the air, all converging into one heartbeat, one moment, one awareness that even in a place bustling with life and activity, she was not invisible, that even small actions, small glances, held meaning, and in that fleeting pause, the narrative of her day, her care, her effort, and her resilience all hung suspended, ready to unfold as the door behind her clicked softly, signaling the continuation of a story that was only just beginning. The soft murmur of conversations continued around Jasmine Carter as she carefully stepped toward the next table, her tray balanced with practiced precision, the sunlight shifting through the windows and casting fleeting patterns across the hardwood floor, reflecting 1,000 small moments of effort and attention, each plate perfectly aligned. The aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables lingering in the air like a comforting embrace. She inhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the space settle over her. The subtle hum of the ventilation overhead blending with the faint clatter of silverware and the quiet rustle of napkins as patrons adjusted in their seats. Her heart still beating with the echo of earlier anxiety. Each pulse a reminder of the weight she carried. The invisible expectations pressing down on her shoulders, a fleeting memory of last night's surfacing. The hurried cleanup after a spill at the back counter, the gentle voice of her younger brother in her mind, reminding her that small actions mattered, that her effort had value beyond the moment. Jasmine allowed herself a brief exhale and tightened her grip on the tray, stepping closer to the edge of the dining area where a table of elderly patrons sat, chatting quietly and sipping on their drinks, the sunlight catching the silver rim of a teacup, the faint clinking of porcelain against saucers, a rhythm that matched her own careful steps. She knelt slightly to place a plate in front of one of the guests, feeling the weight of her responsibility as she adjusted the napkin with a delicate touch, the soft glow of pendant lights overhead reflecting in her eyes. And then she sensed movement at the far end of the room, a shadow passing by the entrance, the subtle click of polished shoes against the hardwood floor capturing her attention. Jasmine froze for a fraction of a second, her body instinctively straightening, the air around her seeming to shift as if holding its breath, the faint scent of lemon polish and warm bread mingling in the atmosphere, grounding her in the moment. She glanced up and caught sight of a man standing near the doorway, tall, confident, yet somehow carrying a presence that made her heart beat faster, the sunlight hitting the strands of his hair, the shimmer of his watch, the way he surveyed the room with an air of casual authority, not imposing but undeniably there. And Jasmine, despite her nerves, felt a quiet steadiness settle over her. Each step she took measured, her mind focusing on the task in front of her, placing a glass of water, smoothing a folded napkin, adjusting a chair slightly, as if every gesture mattered. And then a soft cough from a nearby table drew her gaze, the subtle quiver in her hands barely perceptible. Yet the way she held herself, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, conveyed both vulnerability and strength, a small bead of sweat tracing the line of her temple. Catching the light, her eyes flicking toward the man at the entrance again, noticing how he paused mid-step, his attention drawn not to the chaos of the busy restaurant, but to her presence, the quiet sincerity in her movements, the way she continued to serve with care despite the rising tension, the ambient sounds of silverware and quiet conversations blending seamlessly, creating a cinematic rhythm that mirrored the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. She straightened fully, letting the sunlight catch the slight curve of her lips in a controlled exhale, the faint creak of her shoes against the polished floor punctuating the moment, the man's gaze holding hers for a brief second, a silent acknowledgment passing between them, the weight of unspoken understanding settling into the room, the subtle warmth of the afternoon light highlighting the meticulous movements of her hands as she adjusted the placement of a plate, the soft hum of the ventilation continuing in the background, each sound layering over the previous, creating a symphony of ordinary actions elevated by attention and intent. And in that suspended heartbeat, Jasmine felt both the gravity of her responsibility and the quiet affirmation that her efforts were being witnessed, the pattern of light, sound, and motion weaving together into a tapestry of resilience and quiet dignity. The man's subtle nod, almost imperceptible, yet carrying a resonance that seemed to echo through the space, a promise that her perseverance and care had not gone unnoticed, the soft patter of footsteps from a server in the background fading as Jasmine continued her work, each measured movement deliberate, grounded in the knowledge that even in the smallest gestures, her presence mattered, the sunlight catching on the rims of glasses and the edges of plates, the faint scent of polished wood and fresh food blending with the warmth of her resolve. And as she placed the last dish on the table, a quiet calm settled over her. Attention eased not by external recognition, but by the certainty of doing what needed to be done, the room alive with subtle energy. Yet in that microcosm, Jasmine stood as the axis around which the ordinary became extraordinary, the rhythm of life flowing around her as she straightened, adjusted her uniform, and prepared for the next moment in a continuum of care, awareness, and unwavering presence. The man at the entrance shifting slightly, his attention never wavering, a silent witness to the quiet heroism unfolding, and the faint shimmer of sunlight catching her hair as she moved to the next table hinted at the unfolding story yet to be revealed. Jasmine Carter moved toward the back of the restaurant, each step deliberate, her shoes whispering against the polished hardwood floor, the afternoon sunlight slipping through the tall windows and scattering in golden fragments across the tables, catching on the rims of glasses and the edges of plates, highlighting the subtle curve of her posture as she carried the tray with steady hands. The faint hum of conversation around her blending with the rhythmic clatter of cutlery, a distant murmur of laughter punctuating the soft ambience, her mind replaying the brief glance from the man at the entrance, the quiet weight of his observation settling over her like an unseen presence. She paused near the service station, adjusting a stack of freshly cleaned napkins, feeling the coolness of the polished counter against her fingertips, the scent of lemon polish and freshly brewed coffee mingling in the air, grounding her in the familiar rhythm of the space, a soft breeze from the open door, brushing against her face, carrying the faint sounds of the street beyond, and she inhaled slowly, letting the steady cadence of her breathing align with the subtle pulse of the room. The gentle tilting of a chandelier above casting dancing reflections across the floor, each movement of her hands precise and measured, the tray balanced carefully, each dish positioned with care. She caught the glint of sunlight on a wine glass as she placed it gently on a table, a small ripple of satisfaction passing through her as the light shifted across the surface, the soft murmur of patrons providing a backdrop to her focused attention. She moved to a nearby table where an elderly couple adjusted their chairs, and she bent slightly, offering a warm, professional smile, the edge of a cloth brushing against her wrist as she straightened, the subtle sensation reminding her of the hours spent preparing, arranging, polishing, and maintaining a sense of grace under pressure, her thoughts drifting briefly to the early mornings she had spent learning the ropes of the restaurant, the lessons taught by seasoned servers about timing, presence, and attentiveness, the patience required to navigate each interaction, the care needed to anticipate needs without being intrusive, all layered atop the quiet personal expectations she held herself to, the weight of responsibility carrying both pride and exhaustion. She straightened, the sunlight catching the curve of her hair, the sheen of a bead of sweat forming and sliding down her temple, each small gesture deliberate, mindful, the subtle click of a chair as she adjusted it a fraction of an inch reflecting her attention to detail, and then a movement at the far entrance caught her eye, a shadow falling across the polished floor, the sound of footsteps soft but distinct, measured and confident, drawing her gaze upward, the man standing there paused, his presence commanding without demanding, observing the room with a quiet focus, his eyes lingering on her, and Jasmine felt a momentary stillness settle within her, the subtle warmth of recognition weaving through the air between them. She continued her task, placing a plate with care, smoothing the edges of a napkin, aligning utensils with precision, each movement a dance of controlled intention, the faint hum of conversation continuing, the distant chime of a bell marking another entry or exit, the rhythm of life carrying on around her, yet within that flow, she felt the invisible tether of attention, her focus sharpened, each step, each gesture, each careful adjustment of tray or plate a statement of resilience and dedication. The sunlight catching on the polished surface of a serving counter as she passed, the warmth of the room mingling with the faint aroma of baked bread and roasted vegetables, grounding her in the familiar while hinting at the subtle shift in energy as the man remained at the entrance, a silent witness to her composed movements, the soft glow of overhead lighting reflecting off the glassware, the gentle sway of patrons in their chairs, the ambient sounds weaving a tapestry of ordinary activity elevated by presence and intent. Jasmine inhaled again, her fingers brushing against the tray with the memory of early mornings and long nights. The quiet resolve in her movements mirrored in the subtle acknowledgment of the man. And in that suspended moment, she carried both the weight of responsibility and the quiet pride of mastery, each motion a testament to endurance and grace. The delicate balance of plates, glasses, and silverware, the measured tilt of her head, the soft curve of her lips, all woven into the rhythm of the restaurant as she prepared to navigate the rest of the afternoon. The promise of unfolding recognition and understanding hovering in the air, and Jasmine, steadfast and composed, moved forward with intent, her focus unbroken, the narrative of her day continuing to build in quiet. Intricate detail, each gesture and glance an integral note in the symphony of her perseverance and subtle triumph. Jasmine Carter carefully navigated between tables, each step measured and deliberate, the sunlight streaming through the large windows painting the hardwood floor with patches of gold, reflecting off the edges of glasses and the polished surfaces of the tables, the faint hum of conversation and soft clinking of cutlery, creating a rhythm that mirrored her steady heartbeat. The warm aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables mingling with the scent of lemon polish, grounding her in the familiar environment while her mind remained alert to every subtle shift in energy around her. She bent slightly to serve a plate to a small family at the corner table, her fingers brushing lightly against the edges of the dish as she set it down, the precision in her movement reflecting hours of experience and careful attention. The soft rustle of napkins as she adjusted them brought a quiet satisfaction, and she straightened, her gaze sweeping the room to ensure nothing was overlooked, the polished floor catching the sunlight in a way that highlighted her reflection briefly as she moved, a soft breeze from the open doorway brushing across her cheek. Carrying the muted sounds of the street beyond, Jasmine inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of the room settle into her shoulders, her mind recalling the lessons from early days spent learning to anticipate the needs of guests before they asked, the patience required to maintain composure when plates stacked high or orders arrived out of sequence, the quiet determination to provide care and attention despite the pressure. She adjusted the tray in her hands, ensuring balance, and continued toward the back of the dining room, where a cluster of tables sat beneath a pendant light, its gentle glow reflecting off the edges of wine glasses and the polished silverware. The soft murmur of conversation blending seamlessly with the subtle creak of chairs as patrons shifted in their seats, a gentle tapping of fingers against a table marking the rhythm of time in the space. She paused briefly at a table where an elderly gentleman reached slightly for his water, her hand moving almost instinctively to assist, placing the glass carefully in front of him, the slight smile on his face bringing a small warmth to her chest, the sun catching on the rim of the glass and refracting into tiny beams across the tablecloth. Jasmine continued, moving with purpose, each step aligned with the rhythm of the room, the ambient sounds layering around her like a gentle soundtrack, the faint scent of herbs from the kitchen blending with the warm light, the reflection of her uniform soft against the polished floor, each gesture deliberate, mindful, a quiet ballet of precision and care, her mind briefly drifting to the memory of early mornings washing dishes and the small encouragements from her family that kept her motivated, the unspoken pride she carried in executing each movement with care. She adjusted the napkins, aligned utensils, and straightened a chair, the faint sound of glassware clinking in the distance providing a metronome to her actions, the room alive with subtle energy. Yet she moved as if in her own sphere of focused attention, the sunlight catching the slight sheen of perspiration on her brow, a reminder of the effort she poured into every detail, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of a plate as she moved it with careful precision, each motion measured yet fluid, the soft echo of footsteps from a server behind her blending into the ambient noise, her own movements deliberate, grounded, carrying both the weight of responsibility and the quiet pride in her work. As she reached a table toward the center of the room, she bent slightly to place a dish before a young couple, their polite smiles and soft thanks reinforcing her sense of purpose. The sunlight falling across her hair and uniform, the polished floor reflecting the warm glow, the ambient sounds of conversation, silverware, and quiet laughter weaving together with the rhythm of her deliberate movements. Jasmine straightened fully, inhaled slowly, and adjusted the tray in her hands once more, feeling the familiar balance and weight. Her mind present, attentive to the subtleties of the room, the slight movements of patrons, the gentle shift in the light as the afternoon progressed, the hum of activity around her forming a tapestry of quiet diligence, each gesture and glance purposeful, her awareness stretching to every corner of the dining room, carrying both the quiet vigilance and steadfast dedication that defined her presence. And as she prepared to move toward the next table, a soft click from the entrance caught her attention, her head lifting slightly, the subtle movement of a shadow across the polished floor drawing her gaze, a quiet, almost imperceptible acknowledgment passing through the air as her focus remained sharp. And in that suspended moment, the balance of effort, care, and awareness coalesced, creating a rhythm of ordinary acts elevated into extraordinary attention. The sunlight dancing across the room, the soft hum of activity, and the steady, measured movements of Jasmine, carrying her through the next moments of her unfolding day. Jasmine Carter paused briefly near the center of the restaurant. Her tray held steady despite the subtle tremor in her hands, the soft glow of the afternoon sunlight filtering through the tall windows and casting long, warm lines across the polished hardwood floor, the gentle hum of conversation around her forming a steady backdrop, punctuated by the faint clinking of silverware and the occasional low murmur of a patron's laughter. The aroma of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and brewed coffee, intertwining with the scent of lemon polish and waxed wood, grounding her as she took a measured breath and allowed her focus to sharpen. The rhythm of her movements fluid yet precise, each step calculated to maintain balance, to deliver each plate and glass with care, the reflection of light on the polished surfaces catching the edges of her uniform and highlighting the subtle effort behind each motion. Her eyes scanning the room to anticipate the needs of each table, the soft shuffle of a chair or the quiet adjustment of a napkin becoming markers in the rhythm of service. Jasmine bent slightly to set down a carefully arranged plate, her fingers brushing the edge with practiced delicacy, and as she straightened, she felt the quiet weight of presence behind her, a subtle shift in the air that made her pause mid-step, the sound of confident footsteps on the polished floor drawing her gaze toward the entrance, her chest tightening slightly as the familiar yet unexpected figure of the man from earlier came into view, his presence commanding without force, the sunlight glinting off his watch and casting a subtle shadow across the floor, his eyes scanning the room with quiet attention, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met, a silent acknowledgment passing between them, Jasmine's heart fluttering, but her composure holding firm, each careful motion deliberate, balancing strength with grace, her uniform slightly warm from the activity, her shoes clicking softly against the hardwood as she moved to the next table, a couple seated quietly, their polite smiles encouraging her steady movements, the sunlight catching on their glassware and reflecting subtle patterns across the white tablecloth, the gentle hum of air vents and soft chatter layering with the faint scent of herbs from the kitchen, grounding her as she positioned the next plate, adjusting a fork and knife with meticulous attention, her hands steady despite the fatigue that lingered from earlier shifts, the memory of her younger brother's morning note offering a quiet reassurance that her care mattered, each plate and glass a small extension of her dedication and presence. Jasmine exhaled softly, feeling the rhythm of the room align with her own heartbeat, the subtle warmth of the sunlight across her shoulders mingling with the cool air from the open window near the door, the distant sound of a car passing outside blending with the muffled city noises, creating a layered soundscape. She straightened fully, adjusting the tray one last time before moving to the service station for a brief moment of preparation, the polished counter cool beneath her fingertips, the stack of neatly folded napkins and the faint glimmer of cutlery arranged like an orchestra ready for performance. She inhaled, letting the steady cadence of her breathing align with the controlled movements of her hands. the quiet murmur of the dining room continuing around her, patrons shifting gently in their seats, the soft clink of glassware echoing subtly, the sunlight casting soft shadows across the hardwood, the gentle sway of the chandelier above dancing in tandem with the reflections on the polished surfaces, and Jasmine, aware of the figure observing from the entrance, felt a calm determination settle within her, each gesture intentional, each movement an affirmation of resilience and quiet dignity. She moved forward toward a small family at the back table, adjusting the position of a chair and setting down a plate with precise care, the warm light catching the subtle sheen of perspiration on her brow, her fingers brushing the edge of the dish with practiced delicacy, the soft rustle of the tablecloth beneath her hands providing a gentle auditory anchor, the faint aroma of baked bread and roasted vegetables mingling with the polished wood and lemon scent from earlier, grounding her in the moment. She glanced briefly toward the entrance again, noticing the slight shift of the observer, the quiet acknowledgment lingering as she continued her work, each careful placement of plates, adjustment of cutlery, and smooth gesture of her hands blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the restaurant, the ambient sounds, light, and subtle movements around her creating a cinematic flow that carried both the mundane and the extraordinary together. Jasmine inhaled deeply once more, letting the room's energy settle into her shoulders, her heartbeat syncing with the flow of service, aware of the unspoken connection, yet remaining fully focused on the delicate orchestration of care, attention, and presence that defined each step, each glance, each measured motion. Ready to continue the rhythm of her afternoon with the same dedication and composure that had carried her through the earlier moments. The sunlight dancing across the room and the quiet hum of activity providing the backdrop for the next unfolding sequence of her day, each motion an act of mastery and resilience, each breath a quiet assertion of strength and steady determination, carrying forward into the next moments of attentive service. Jasmine Carter took a slow, deliberate step toward the corner of the dining room where a small group of patrons had gathered for an afternoon meal, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows painting warm patterns across the polished hardwood, each reflection catching on the edges of silverware and the rims of glasses, casting tiny prisms of light that danced across the white tablecloths, the soft hum of conversation blending seamlessly with the subtle clink of plates and the faint rustle of napkins as chairs shifted slightly under the gentle weight of those seated. Jasmine inhaled deeply, letting the comforting aroma of baked bread, roasted vegetables, and freshly brewed coffee mingle with the lingering scent of lemon polish and waxed wood, grounding her in the familiar rhythm of the space, each breath synchronizing with the controlled movements of her hands as she adjusted the placement of a plate with precise care, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge to ensure balance, the subtle warmth of the sunlight on her shoulders a reminder of the passage of the afternoon, the gentle sway of the chandelier overhead creating a pattern of moving light across the room. She straightened, her eyes scanning the faces of patrons, noticing the soft expressions, the subtle smiles of appreciation, the quiet attention given to the delicate details of service, the faint hum of the air conditioning providing a steady backdrop, blending with the muffled sounds from the street outside, a soft car horn or distant footsteps adding layers to the ambient atmosphere. And then she paused, her gaze flicking toward the entrance as a shadow shifted slightly, the presence unmistakable, the quiet confidence in the figure drawing her focus, a subtle alignment of posture and attention that conveyed observation without intrusion. Jasmine's heart beat a little faster, but she allowed the rhythm to steady, each movement deliberate, each step measured to maintain balance. She bent slightly to adjust the positioning of a glass, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface, the faint weight of the liquid within providing a grounding sensation, the slight sheen of perspiration on her brow catching the sunlight, her hair falling in a careful sweep to one side, and she exhaled slowly, aligning her awareness with the room, each plate, napkin, and utensil a small expression of care and attention, the murmured voices and soft clatter of cutlery forming a subtle symphony around her, each note blending into the background as she continued her measured walk to the next table, placing a plate with gentle precision and smoothing the napkin just so, her movements fluid, graceful, and unhurried, her eyes flicking occasionally toward the entrance. Noticing the subtle shift of the observer as he adjusted his stance, the sunlight catching the edges of his watch, the quiet authority in his posture suggesting attentiveness and presence, not interference. Jasmine felt a quiet strength settle within her, each breath and step reinforcing her composure and focus. The rhythm of service unfolding like a carefully orchestrated performance, the warmth of the room, the sunlight, and the faint ambient sounds forming a backdrop against which her dedication and care became palpable. She moved toward another table with a tray held firmly, adjusting plates and glasses with meticulous attention, the subtle hum of conversation rising and falling around her like a tide, the soft shuffle of her shoes against the polished floor blending into the room's natural cadence. She straightened fully, letting the sunlight catch her uniform and highlighting the care in each gesture, her chest rising and falling with calm, controlled breaths, each exhale releasing a small tension carried from earlier moments. The quiet acknowledgment of the figure at the entrance lingering in her awareness, the gentle scent of baked goods and roasted vegetables a grounding presence, the faint reflection of her hands in the polished table edges mirroring the precision of her movements. And in that moment, she carried both the weight of responsibility and the quiet pride of maintaining focus, the sunlight flickering across the floor in shifting patterns, the soft murmur of activity, and the rhythm of her measured steps blending seamlessly as she completed her service at the current table, adjusting the final napkin and straightening the chair, each motion deliberate, intentional, and imbued with a subtle sense of mastery. The room alive with ordinary moments elevated by care, attention, and presence, the observer at the entrance remaining a quiet, perceptive witness, and Jasmine, steady and composed, took her next step toward the final table in her path, her awareness complete, her focus unwavering, each gesture a testament to resilience, dedication, and quiet strength, carrying forward into the next unfolding moments of her day. Jasmine Carter moved toward the far end of the dining room, her steps careful yet fluid, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows casting golden patterns across the polished hardwood floor, the soft hum of conversation and faint clinking of cutlery forming a rhythmic backdrop to her movements. She inhaled slowly, the aroma of roasted vegetables and fresh bread mingling with the subtle scent of lemon polish and waxed wood grounding her in the space, each breath steadying the slight tremor in her hands. As she balanced the tray with precision, her eyes scanning the tables for any small need that might go unnoticed, the gentle sway of the chandelier above catching in her vision, reflecting light across the glassware and polished surfaces, her focus unbroken, each gesture deliberate and graceful. She bent slightly to place a dish before a couple seated near the window, her fingers brushing the edge with care, the sunlight glinting softly on the rim of the plate, the ambient sounds of murmured conversation, silverware, and soft laughter creating a symphony of ordinary life elevated by attention and presence. Jasmine straightened fully, her eyes flicking toward the entrance where the figure she had noticed earlier lingered, his posture calm but attentive, a subtle shift of weight indicating awareness without intrusion, her chest rising and falling in measured rhythm as she continued her careful service, the polished floor beneath her reflecting the interplay of light and shadow across the room. Each movement fluid and confident, she adjusted a napkin with a practiced hand, aligned a fork and knife, and then exhaled slowly, allowing the rhythm of her own heartbeat to synchronize with the pulse of the room, the faint murmur of conversation and soft rustle of chairs providing a gentle soundtrack, a subtle warmth radiating from the sunlight catching on her shoulders, her uniform slightly damp from earlier exertions, the gentle tap of her shoes against the hardwood blending seamlessly with the ambient sounds. She moved to the next table, placing plates and glasses with precision, the reflective surfaces of the glassware catching the light and scattering it into delicate patterns, her attention unwavering, each small gesture conveying care and consideration, the aroma of food, polished wood, and lemons subtly layering into a comforting tapestry that anchored her presence, her mind briefly recalling the quiet determination that had carried her through earlier shifts, the training and small lessons learned about patience, observation, and graceful execution of tasks under pressure. the subtle acknowledgment of the observer at the entrance lingering in her awareness. Jasmine bent slightly again to adjust a chair for a patron, her fingers brushing the smooth surface as she ensured comfort and ease, the sunlight highlighting the faint sheen of perspiration on her brow. Her hair slightly shifted from the movement, catching light as she straightened once more, the soft sound of glassware clinking in, the background marking another beat in the symphony of the dining room. She exhaled gently, grounding herself in the familiar rhythm, the warmth and energy of the room carrying through her, each careful motion a quiet testament to her focus and dedication. And then, as she lifted the tray to move toward the last table on her path, a subtle shift in the observer's stance caught her eye, a quiet acknowledgment that required no words, her awareness sharpening, each gesture, each step, each breath, aligning with the steady flow of activity around her, the sunlight moving across the floor and furniture, creating a shifting mosaic that danced around her movements, the faint aroma of baked bread and roasted vegetables mingling with the warmth of the polished surfaces, a comforting sensory anchor. Jasmine adjusted the napkins one final time, smoothed the tablecloth, and straightened the last chair with careful precision, the room alive with quiet energy, the measured rhythm of service, interweaving seamlessly with the ambient sounds. And as she paused briefly to inhale and steady her shoulders, the presence of the figure at the entrance remained, an unspoken connection, a subtle acknowledgment that her dedication, focus, and careful attention had not gone unnoticed, the sunlight catching the edges of her uniform and tray, reflecting the quiet mastery of her movements, the gentle hum of conversation, soft laughter, and silverware providing a layered soundtrack. And in that suspended moment, Jasmine carried both the weight of responsibility and the quiet pride of composure and skill, each gesture deliberate, each breath controlled, each step imbued with intention, the interplay of light, sound, and measured motion creating a cinematic rhythm as she prepared to continue through the rest of the afternoon, her awareness fully present, poised, and unwavering. The room a stage for the ordinary yet extraordinary dedication and care she embodied. Jasmine Carter took a measured step back from the last table she had attended, her tray now empty but her attention fully present, the warm afternoon sunlight cascading through the tall windows casting gentle streaks of light across the polished hardwood floor, the reflections dancing softly across the edges of plates and glassware, the faint murmur of conversation and the subtle clinking of cutlery, creating a quiet rhythm that aligned with the careful pace of her movements. She exhaled slowly, the aroma of baked bread, roasted vegetables, and freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the lingering scent of lemon polish and waxed wood grounding her in the moment, the subtle warmth of the sunlight brushing against her shoulders offering a comforting weight, her eyes scanning the room for any small detail that might need attention, the soft shuffle of chairs and gentle footsteps forming a backdrop to her presence, each step measured, deliberate, and infused with a quiet attentiveness. Jasmine paused briefly to adjust a napkin and realign a utensil, the smooth surface cool beneath her fingers, the faint sheen of perspiration on her brow catching the sunlight, highlighting the effort behind each motion. She straightened fully, her gaze sweeping the room with a subtle awareness of every patron and their quiet expressions, the gentle sway of the chandelier above sending shifting reflections across the polished surfaces, her movements precise, fluid, and composed, each gesture conveying care and consideration. She inhaled again, letting the rhythm of her breathing synchronize with the ambient sounds of the dining room, the soft hum of conversation, the occasional clink of silverware, the distant murmur of the street outside carrying through the open doorway, blending seamlessly into the scene. Jasmine moved toward the service station with a quiet determination, adjusting stacks of clean napkins and polished cutlery with meticulous attention, the sunlight catching the edges of the silverware, reflecting small glimmers across the countertop, the warm, comforting aroma of bread and coffee forming a subtle anchor, her focus unbroken, each movement deliberate, a quiet testament to her composure and attention to detail. She glanced again toward the entrance where the figure had remained for much of the afternoon, his presence calm, observant, and patient, a silent acknowledgment in the way he shifted slightly, his eyes following her actions without interference. the sunlight glinting softly off his watch and casting a subtle shadow across the floor. Jasmine felt a brief flicker of warmth in that recognition, a quiet sense of being seen for the dedication, care, and attention she brought to her work. She bent slightly to replace a plate that had been removed, her fingers brushing gently across the smooth surface, the small adjustment precise, mindful, and intentional, the room around her alive with the ordinary symphony of murmured conversations, clinking silverware, and shifting chairs, each sound forming a layer in the ambient rhythm. Jasmine inhaled slowly, allowing the gentle warmth of the sunlight and the faint scent of polished wood and lemon to center her, her heartbeat steady and deliberate, each motion a careful balance of grace and control. She straightened once more, the soft rustle of her uniform blending with the subtle echo of footsteps on the hardwood, her attention unwavering, the figure at the entrance remaining a quiet observer, his presence a subtle reminder of recognition and awareness. Jasmine moved toward a small cluster of tables near the window, arranging plates and glasses with careful precision, smoothing napkins and aligning utensils, each gesture deliberate, her eyes catching the light reflected off the glassware, forming tiny prisms that danced across the table surfaces, the soft hum of conversation providing a gentle, constant accompaniment, the warm sunlight highlighting the subtle contours of her movements, her careful breathing aligning with the rhythm of the room, the faint aroma of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread reinforcing her presence, grounding each motion with quiet intent. Jasmine paused for a moment to inhale deeply, her eyes sweeping the room once more, noting the quiet satisfaction and subtle smiles of patrons, the faint glimmer of sunlight reflecting on their glassware, the soft shifting of chairs and rustle of napkins, each detail weaving together into a cinematic pattern of ordinary moments elevated by precision and care. And in that suspended heartbeat, she carried both the weight of responsibility and the quiet pride of mastery. Each step, each gesture, each breath deliberate, intentional, and imbued with purpose, the sunlight moving across the room, the ambient sounds layering softly in the background, the polished hardwood reflecting both light and the quiet dignity of her movements. Jasmine prepared to continue forward through the remaining afternoon with the same composed focus, each motion a testament to resilience, attention, and quiet excellence. The observer at the entrance a subtle, perceptive presence as she moved gracefully through the room, fully aware and wholly engaged in the rhythm and flow of her service, every detail attended to with meticulous care, the interplay of light, sound, and measured movement creating a cinematic cadence that carried the quiet energy of dedication and composure forward. Jasmine Carter's attention remained fixed on the dining room as she moved toward the center of the restaurant, the sunlight shifting across the polished hardwood floor and creating patterns that danced along the edges of tables and glassware, the faint hum of conversation interwoven with the soft clinking of cutlery, forming a steady rhythm that guided her measured movements, each step deliberate and precise, her shoes whispering against the floor with a subtle click that blended seamlessly into the ambient sounds, the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables mingling with the lingering scent of lemon polish and polished wood grounding her in the present, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths as she focused on the careful placement of a tray she carried, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of a plate to ensure stability. The soft warmth of the sunlight on her shoulders a quiet reassurance amid the steady pace of service. She adjusted a napkin with careful precision, aligning it perfectly alongside a set of silverware, the reflective surfaces catching the light and casting tiny glimmers across the table, and she straightened fully, her gaze sweeping the room to observe patrons and anticipate their needs, the gentle murmur of conversations, the soft shuffle of chairs, and the occasional faint laughter weaving into a backdrop that accentuated the subtle beauty of her movements. Jasmine inhaled deeply, feeling the rhythm of the room align with her heartbeat, each gesture executed with quiet attention, the weight of responsibility balanced with the pride of maintaining composure under observation. She moved to a nearby table where an elderly couple sat quietly, the man adjusting his glass as she bent slightly to place a dish in front of him, her fingertips brushing the rim lightly, the sunlight glinting across the surface. scattering reflections that danced on the white tablecloth, the faint sound of conversation continuing, a soft murmur punctuated by the gentle clatter of cutlery. Jasmine exhaled slowly, grounding herself further as she shifted to another table, each step deliberate, each movement precise, the polished floor reflecting the soft light, the ambient sounds layering into a delicate symphony, her focus unwavering, the subtle warmth of the sunlight catching the edges of her uniform and tray highlighting the care embedded in each gesture. She adjusted a chair for a patron, smoothing the tablecloth and aligning utensils perfectly, her movements fluid and controlled, the quiet concentration evident in her posture, the observer at the entrance remaining a steady presence, watching without interfering, the sunlight reflecting off his watch and casting a subtle shadow that added dimension to the scene. Jasmine inhaled again, letting the room's rhythm settle. Over her shoulders, the subtle scent of baked bread and roasted vegetables forming a grounding sensory layer as she prepared the next plate with gentle care, her fingers steady and precise, the reflection of light on polished surfaces shimmering softly, each gesture purposeful and deliberate, her attention fully engaged. The soft hum of conversation and distant sounds from the street beyond the open doorway layering seamlessly into the background. She moved toward another small table near the window, adjusting plates and glasses with meticulous care, the sunlight glinting off the edges and scattering tiny beams across the table, each breath steady and intentional, aligning with the quiet cadence of the room, her chest rising and falling in measured rhythm, the faint rustle of the napkins and subtle shuffling of chairs blending into a gentle soundtrack. Jasmine paused briefly to inhale, her eyes scanning the room with quiet awareness, noting the subtle satisfaction on patrons' faces, the small nods and quiet smiles acknowledging her presence and attentiveness, the sunlight highlighting each motion and reflecting softly off her uniform. Her tray held steady, the faint sheen of perspiration on her brow catching the light as she straightened fully, moving with deliberate grace toward the next table, each step and gesture a careful articulation of focus, composure, and dedication. The room alive with ordinary moments rendered extraordinary through her attention, the ambient light, sounds, and movement forming a cinematic rhythm that carried her steadily forward, the observer at the entrance remaining a quiet, perceptive presence, and Jasmine, fully engaged in the flow of service, continued her path through the restaurant with unwavering concentration, each action intentional, each motion reflecting resilience, meticulous care, and quiet mastery, preparing to complete the next sequence of her afternoon with the same measured grace and attentive precision that had guided her throughout the day. Jasmine Carter paused at the end of the aisle, her tray held firmly as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long, warm reflections across the polished hardwood floor, each ray highlighting the subtle shimmer of perspiration on her brow and the faint outline of her carefully pressed uniform, the ambient hum of the restaurant mingling with the gentle clatter of silverware and the soft rustle of napkins forming a quiet rhythm that guided her movements. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the aroma of roasted vegetables, freshly baked bread, and brewed coffee mingling with the faint scent of lemon polish. The steady pulse of her heartbeat aligning with the gentle cadence of the room, each step deliberate, measured, and imbued with intent. She bent slightly to place a plate before a small family, her fingers brushing the edge lightly to ensure perfect placement, and then straightened, her gaze sweeping across the dining room, noting the subtle gestures of patrons, the quiet smiles, the slight nods of appreciation, the way light caught on the glassware, casting tiny patterns that danced along the tables. Jasmine's attention flicked briefly toward the entrance where the observer remained, his posture calm yet attentive, a subtle acknowledgment in the tilt of his head and the focused steadiness of his eyes. She felt a quiet steadiness settle within her, a reinforcement of composure as she continued through the room, each gesture precise, each movement fluid and controlled, her tray balanced with care as she moved toward another table, placing glasses and plates with meticulous attention, the soft hum of conversation punctuated by the occasional clink of cutlery forming a gentle soundtrack, sunlight highlighting the careful angles of her movements, reflecting off polished surfaces in delicate glimmers. the gentle sway of the chandelier above casting shifting shadows across the floor, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm as she exhaled softly. Grounding each action in awareness and dedication, Jasmine adjusted a chair slightly for an elderly patron, smoothing a napkin with careful precision, her fingers brushing lightly across the cloth as she ensured comfort and order, the sunlight catching the edge of her hair and uniform, emphasizing the fluidity and control in each motion, the faint murmur of conversation around her blending seamlessly with the subtle sounds of plates and silverware, creating a layered ambience that highlighted the rhythm of her service. She inhaled slowly again, letting the warmth of the room and the faint scent of bread and lemon polish envelop her, movements deliberate, measured, and full of quiet intent, each gesture conveying careful attention and thought. She straightened fully, carrying the tray to a small cluster of tables by the window, adjusting utensils and smoothing napkins with exacting care, the sunlight catching the polished silverware and reflecting into delicate patterns across the tablecloths, her focus unwavering. The soft shuffling of chairs and the faint murmur of patrons blending into a natural cadence that aligned with her movements. Jasmine's awareness of the observer at the entrance remained subtle and steady, his presence a quiet affirmation of recognition without intrusion, the sunlight glinting off his watch and casting a gentle shadow across the polished floor. She exhaled softly, letting her heartbeat align with the rhythm of the dining room, the delicate blend of aromas, ambient sounds, and shifting light reinforcing her grounding in the moment. Each careful placement of a plate, adjustment of a napkin, and alignment of utensils executed with precise intention, her body moving gracefully through the space, balancing strength and finesse, the soft hum of conversation, the gentle clatter of silverware, and the distant city sounds from beyond the doorway, forming a subtle symphony. Jasmine paused for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the quiet warmth of sunlight and the ambient energy of the room settle into her shoulders, the observer at the entrance subtly shifting, a small tilt of the head suggesting attentive awareness. She straightened fully, her gaze sweeping the room once more, noting the tiny gestures of appreciation, the slight smiles and nods, each subtle acknowledgment layering over her awareness, sunlight catching the edges of the polished surfaces as she moved, her tray balanced and steady, fingers brushing delicately against plates and glasses, each motion deliberate and thoughtful, Jasmine's breath slow and controlled, aligning perfectly with the quiet rhythm of the restaurant, the faint reflections of light and movement blending with the gentle sounds of activity. And in that suspended, carefully measured moment, she carried both the weight of responsibility and a quiet pride in her composed mastery, every motion, step, and gesture a testament to focused attention, resilience, and grace, the interplay of sunlight, polished surfaces, and ambient sound creating a cinematic rhythm as she prepared to continue through the remainder of the afternoon with steadfast composure, aware of the presence that had silently observed her throughout, each movement deliberate, intentional, and resonant with quiet excellence. Jasmine. Carter paused briefly near the service station, her tray now carefully set aside, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows creating golden streaks that danced across the polished hardwood floor, reflecting off the rims of glasses and the edges of plates, the faint hum of conversation and soft clinking of silverware forming a gentle rhythm that synchronized with her measured breathing. She inhaled slowly, the scent of freshly baked bread, roasted vegetables, and the lingering aroma of lemon polish grounding her in the present, her chest rising and falling with controlled steadiness, each step deliberate as she moved toward the far end of the dining room, the gentle shuffle of chairs and subtle murmur of patrons layering into a quiet ambient symphony, the sunlight catching the sheen of her uniform and the faint perspiration on her brow, highlighting the effort and attention behind every motion. Jasmine adjusted a napkin with precise care, aligning it perfectly beside polished silverware, her fingers brushing lightly against the cloth as she straightened fully, scanning the room with quiet attentiveness, noting the small smiles and nods of patrons acknowledging her presence without words, the faint clatter of plates providing a subtle cadence, the occasional soft exhale of a chair shifting marking time in the rhythm of the restaurant. She exhaled gently, grounding herself in the gentle warmth of the afternoon sun. Her heartbeat steady, each movement executed with deliberate intent. She moved toward a cluster of tables near the window, placing glasses and plates with meticulous attention, the light glinting off the polished surfaces and scattering into tiny reflections across the tablecloths. Her focus unwavering, the subtle energy of the room flowing around her like a carefully orchestrated pattern, the observer at the entrance remaining a quiet, perceptive presence, his posture relaxed but attentive, eyes following her movements without intrusion, the sunlight glinting off his watch and casting a soft shadow on the polished floor. Jasmine straightened once more, inhaling slowly as she allowed the rhythm of the room to settle into her shoulders, each gesture precise and graceful, the faint scent of bread and roasted vegetables mingling with the polished wood and lemon, creating a sensory anchor for her attention. She adjusted a chair slightly for an elderly couple, smoothing the napkin with careful care, her movements fluid yet exact, each step and gesture executed with quiet purpose, the faint murmur of conversation and subtle shuffle of chairs forming a soft backdrop to her attentiveness, sunlight highlighting the gentle curve of her hair and the careful angles of her posture, each breath aligning with the quiet cadence of the room. The tray now held steady as she moved toward another table, placing a plate and adjusting utensils with meticulous precision, the reflective surfaces catching the light and scattering it in delicate patterns across the polished tabletop, the soft hum of conversation and clinking of cutlery layering seamlessly over the distant sounds of the street outside, blending into the ambient harmony of the space. Jasmine exhaled slowly, grounding each motion with awareness and intent, the faint warmth of the sunlight across her shoulders a subtle reassurance, each gesture and step a careful balance of focus and composure, the quiet acknowledgment of the observer at the entrance lingering in her awareness, a silent recognition that her dedication, attention, and careful execution had not gone unnoticed. She straightened fully, adjusting a napkin, aligning a fork, and placing a glass with gentle care, the room alive with ordinary moments elevated by her presence, the sunlight casting shifting reflections across the polished hardwood, the ambient sounds blending into a cinematic rhythm that carried her steadily forward, her breathing controlled, each gesture deliberate, intentional, and imbued with quiet mastery. Jasmine's awareness spanning the entire dining room, the gentle warmth of the sunlight, the soft murmur of conversation, the faint clatter of silverware, and the polished reflections all combining into a flowing cadence, each motion reinforcing her quiet resilience and focused composure. The observer at the entrance remaining a steady, subtle presence, watching without interference, and Jasmine, fully immersed in the rhythm of service, continued forward, every step, every gesture, every breath deliberate, precise, and full of quiet intent, carrying her through the remainder of the afternoon with unwavering dedication, her movements a testament to patience, care, and mastery. The interplay of sunlight, polished surfaces, and ambient sounds forming a cinematic tapestry that highlighted the quiet excellence of her work, the observer's subtle presence a reminder that attention and recognition can exist without words, and Jasmine moved with fluid grace through the restaurant, each action purposeful, intentional, and resonant with focus and composure. Jasmine Carter exhaled softly as she moved toward the corner table near the back window, her tray now empty and neatly set aside, the sunlight streaming through the tall panes casting a warm, golden glow across the polished hardwood floor, the reflections bouncing gently off the edges of plates and glassware, mingling with the soft murmur of conversation and the subtle clinking of cutlery to create a serene rhythm in the dining room. The aroma of roasted vegetables, freshly baked bread, and brewed coffee enveloping her and blending with the faint scent of lemon polish and polished wood, grounding her in the moment. She adjusted a chair slightly for a patron with quiet care, her fingers brushing lightly over the tablecloth as she smoothed it into place, the soft warmth of the sunlight catching her hair and shoulders, highlighting the fluidity and composure of her movements. She straightened fully and took a slow, measured breath, aligning her heartbeat with the steady cadence of the room, each step deliberate, each motion purposeful. The subtle hum of conversation and the gentle shuffle of chairs forming a natural soundtrack to her focused actions. Jasmine bent slightly to place a glass of water in front of a young couple, her fingers brushing the rim lightly to ensure balance, the light reflecting off the surface and scattering tiny prisms across the tablecloth. She straightened fully, her eyes sweeping the dining room to anticipate the next need, the observer at the entrance remaining a quiet, steady presence, his posture relaxed yet attentive, the sunlight glinting softly off his watch and casting a subtle shadow on the polished floor. Jasmine inhaled deeply again, letting the warmth of the sun and the gentle rhythm of activity settle into her shoulders. Each gesture executed with care, precision, and quiet confidence. She adjusted napkins and aligned utensils with meticulous attention, the soft murmur of patrons blending with the ambient clink of silverware and subtle rustle of chairs, forming a layered, cinematic texture that elevated the ordinary into something extraordinary. She moved to a small cluster of tables by the window, placing plates and glasses carefully, the sunlight catching the polished surfaces and scattering reflections across the floor, each breath deliberate, her chest rising and falling with measured rhythm, aligning with the ambient cadence of the room. The faint aroma of baked bread, roasted vegetables, and lemon polish anchoring her focus and reinforcing her presence. Jasmine straightened fully, inhaling slowly as she allowed the rhythm of the room to guide her next movements, her fingers brushing lightly across a plate to adjust its placement, the sunlight glinting off the edges of glassware, the soft shimmer highlighting the fluidity of her gestures, each step measured, each motion executed with quiet intent. She glanced toward the entrance once more, noting the subtle shift of the observer, a silent acknowledgment passing between them, reinforcing the sense of recognition and awareness. Jasmine exhaled gently, letting her composure and focus remain unbroken as she moved toward the final table in her section, adjusting a chair slightly, smoothing a napkin, and setting a glass with deliberate precision. The soft ambient hum of conversation and the faint clatter of silverware forming a gentle backdrop, the sunlight highlighting her movements and reflecting off the polished hardwood and glass surfaces, each gesture a testament to patience, attention, and quiet mastery. She inhaled slowly, the warmth of the room settling into her shoulders, her chest rising and falling in a controlled rhythm, her hands steady and precise, each action intentional and deliberate, her awareness fully engaged with every detail of the dining room. The sunlight flickering across polished surfaces, the soft rustle of napkins, the subtle shuffle of chairs, the faint clink of cutlery, all blending into a cinematic cadence that carried her through the room. Jasmine paused for a moment, inhaling deeply and letting the quiet energy of the space settle over her. Each gesture precise, each step measured, her composure unwavering, the observer at the entrance remaining a silent, perceptive presence, the sunlight glinting off the edges of his watch, casting a soft shadow on the polished floor, and in that suspended moment, Jasmine carried both the weight of responsibility and the quiet pride of mastery. Each breath, step, and gesture executed with intent and grace, her awareness and focus unwavering, the interplay of sunlight, reflections, ambient sound, and subtle motion creating a cinematic rhythm. As she prepared to complete the remaining moments of the afternoon, each action deliberate, precise, and imbued with quiet excellence, fully present, steady, and composed, moving through the room with intentionality, attention, and quiet mastery that elevated ordinary service into a display of poise, resilience, and careful dedication. Jasmine Carter stood in the center of the dining room, the late afternoon sunlight spilling through the tall windows and scattering golden patterns across the polished hardwood floor, the reflections dancing along the edges of glassware and plates, the soft hum of conversation mingling with the subtle clink of silverware creating a rhythmic backdrop that aligned perfectly with the careful cadence of her movements. She exhaled slowly, the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, roasted vegetables, and brewed coffee blending with the faint scent of lemon polish and waxed wood, grounding her in the moment, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths as she adjusted a napkin and aligned utensils with meticulous care. The the sunlight catching the faint sheen of perspiration on her brow and the subtle curves of her hair as she straightened fully, her eyes sweeping the room to ensure every detail was attended to, the gentle shuffle of chairs and quiet murmurs of patrons forming a soft, layered ambience. Jasmine moved toward a table near the far window, placing a glass of water and a carefully arranged plate with precision, her fingers brushing lightly against the rim of the plate to ensure balance. The polished surfaces catching the sunlight and scattering tiny reflections across the table, each motion deliberate, measured, and full of quiet intent, her attention unwavering as she bent slightly to adjust the positioning of a chair for a patron, smoothing the tablecloth with gentle care, the soft clink of silverware in the distance providing a subtle metronome for her movements. She inhaled slowly again, feeling the rhythm of the room align with the steady beat of her own heart, each gesture precise, her tray balanced and steady as she moved to a small cluster of tables in the corner, placing plates, aligning utensils, and adjusting napkins with exacting attention, the sunlight glinting off polished glassware and reflecting into delicate prisms across the tablecloth, her composure unwavering, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, the gentle warmth of sunlight across her shoulders a quiet comfort, the observer at the entrance remaining a silent, perceptive presence, his posture relaxed yet attentive, eyes following her movements without interference. Jasmine exhaled softly, grounding herself in the subtle energy of the room, each step deliberate, each motion intentional, every breath and gesture reflecting patience, dedication, and quiet mastery, the faint murmur of conversation, the soft shuffle of chairs, and the occasional clink of glassware blending into a layered ambient symphony, sunlight reflecting across polished surfaces, accentuating the care embedded in every action. Jasmine moved with fluid grace toward the next table, her tray carefully balanced, placing glasses and plates with deliberate precision, the sunlight highlighting the delicate angles of her movements, her chest rising and falling steadily, her awareness spanning the entire dining room, the faint aroma of baked bread, roasted vegetables, and lemon polish anchoring her in the present, each breath intentional, each gesture purposeful. She straightened fully, adjusting a napkin and aligning utensils, the ambient sounds and soft reflections forming a subtle cinematic rhythm, the observer at the entrance subtly shifting, a quiet acknowledgment of her dedication and focus. Jasmine paused briefly, inhaling deeply, feeling the room's energy settle into her shoulders, each step, each motion, each breath executed with deliberate precision, her focus unbroken, every gesture reflecting both resilience and composure, the polished floor catching the sunlight and reflecting a mosaic of light across the room, the gentle hum of conversation and the soft clatter of silverware blending into a harmonious backdrop. Jasmine continued her movements, aligning plates, adjusting napkins, and placing glasses with careful attention, her fingers brushing lightly across the polished surfaces, each action deliberate and full of intent, the sunlight shifting across the floor highlighting the quiet mastery of her gestures, the subtle warmth and scent of the room reinforcing her steady presence, the observer remaining a calm, perceptive presence at the entrance, his subtle, not a quiet recognition of her focus and care. And as Jasmine moved through the last stretch of the dining room, the interplay of sunlight, polished surfaces, ambient sound, and fluid, deliberate motion coalesced into a cinematic rhythm, each step, each gesture, each breath carrying both the weight of responsibility and the quiet pride of mastery, her awareness fully present, her composure unwavering, and in that suspended, radiant moment, the room itself seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the quiet excellence, dedication, and poise that Jasmine embodied, each movement a testament to patience, care, and resilience, the interplay of light, sound, and subtle motion elevating ordinary service into an extraordinary display of focus, grace, and quiet mastery, carrying forward the unfolding story of her afternoon with deliberate intent and unwavering presence.